This is Planet Poet, Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and thank you so much for being with me today. I'm very happy to introduce my guest poet by phone, Bruce Weber, to discuss his life as a poet, poetry event organizer, and art historian, and to delve into his new book, There Are Too Many Words in My House, recently published by Rogue Scholars Press. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being on. Bruce lives in the Hudson Valley, but he's brought a wealth of his poetry life to us, and I just want to share some of your bio with our listeners. Bruce Weber is the author of 5 previously published books of poetry. These poems are not pretty. Miami, Palmetto Press, 1992. How the Poem Died, New York, Linear Arts, 1998. Poetic Justice, New York, Ikon Press, 2004, which I just read and I loved. The First Time I Had Sex with T.S. Eliot, New York, Venom Press, 2004, and The Breakup of My First Marriage, Rogue Scholars Press, 2019. And his latest is There Are Too Many Words in My House. Bruce's work has appeared in numerous magazines as well as in several anthologies, including Up is Up, But So Is Down, Downtown Writings, New York University 2006, and many others. He has performed regularly in the tri-state area, both alone and for many years with his former and current, I might add, performance group, Bruce Weber's No Chance Ensemble, which has produced the CD, Let's Dine Like Jack Johnson Tonight. And I know Bruce from being part of his poetry extravaganza, the first one in 2019 in Kingston at the Beverly Lounge. For 25 years, Bruce has produced the alternative New Year's Day spoken word performance extravaganza in New York City. Bruce moved with his wife, the artist and writer Joanne Pagano Weber, to Saugerties in 2018. This January 1st marked the second Hudson Valley New Year's Day spoken word performance extravaganza. And as I said, the first was held at the Beverly Lounge in Kingston, and Bruce hopes to return there next January 1st. This year, because of the pandemic, he organized a live stream that took place this last Friday with the help and support of several curators, including Teresa Costa, Philip Levine, Sam Truitt, and Mikhail Horowitz, and David Schnell in Green Kill in Kingston, which featured 36 writers and musicians from the Hudson Valley area, each performing from 6 to 8 minutes, that was broadcast on YouTube. Also, Bruce is an art historian, a former museum curator and director of research and exhibitions for a major gallery in New York. He has organized many exhibitions and authored numerous publications on American art. Currently, Bruce is lecturing, writing, and curating exhibitions revolving around the historic Woodstock art community. Well, Bruce, I'm glad you're up here with us. Let's start with a poem from your new collection.
Okay. Something was razor-bladed out of the photo. Something was razor-bladed out of the photo, like squadrons of dark, uniformed soldiers of a passing civilization, like garbage thrown the narrow neck between tenements, like death on a high wire among dealers who want to cheat you. Something was dynamited to smithereens without dignity, without regard for its elders, without respecting a higher calling, waving farewell to Emma Lazarus's promise, to Walt Whitman's energy and motion, to Jacob Reese's crusader spirit behind the camera, to Margaret Sanger's passion, to Emma Goldman's fiery speeches about the poor and forlorn. Something was stripped away from the soul of the city, the exchange every immigrant makes for a chance his children know a brighter future. Something was disappearing in fog like a tugboat out in the harbor beyond the eye of the paparazzi's camera, halfway down a flagpole in the trash bins behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in the community gardens nestled between cracks in the pavement.
That's Bruce Weber reading his poem, Something Was Razor-Bladed, out of the photo. It makes me want to cry, considering everything that's going on now. It's sort of a about New York, but it's about everything else, I think, also. It's a very urban poem, and it mentions numerous sites, the Metropolitan Museum, the Statue of Liberty through Emma Lazarus. All of these, you were born in New York, is that right, Bruce?
Right, yeah. No, I was born in Brooklyn. We lived in Brooklyn until I was, I guess, about high school, and then I lived in Rockaway, and then later had a chance to move into Manhattan. But I also lived in other places. I lived in Kentucky. I lived in Washington. I lived in Florida for a long time, both in West Palm Beach and in Miami. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to come back. I got a job in the city in 1990, so I came back in 1990.
And why did you write this poem? When did you write it?
It's a little hard to figure out when I wrote it. I ran a reading series for a long time on Rivington Street in Lower Manhattan at ABC No Rio. I sort of organized it, but we had hosts every week. At one point, I think we had 5 hosts, and I lived in the East Village for quite a while. I think it comes out of that experience, just being in the city. For some poets, they can be more nature-oriented. They can be more urban-oriented. Mm-hmm. For a period in West Palm Beach, I studied with a poet, Susan Mitchell. And part of that workshop, I remember, was discussing the kind of the experience of where you live and how that affects the kind of writing that you do. Living up here now in the Hudson Valley, do I write as many urban poems? Don't know. To me, at this point, I think it has more to do with tone and the kind of thing that you're expressing, and if it's more lyrical or more angry or more angular or something. It really depends on more about the mood that I'm maybe trying to get across, whether it's urban or country.
Mm-hmm. When you moved here, did you decide to move? Was it very premeditated, or was it sort of off the cuff?
Yeah, well, we had rented houses beginning in '99. My wife Joanne and I in Columbia County, and we actually looked for a house there. And then we moved out of the village in 2001, right after 9/11. Mm-hmm. We had been arranging to buy an apartment in Sunnyside in Queens just to own something, because the rents, of course, got astronomical. But after we moved there, I said, I'd rather be on the side of the river closer to Woodstock, because there's just more to do here. I love it on both sides of the river. So we got a place. We rented in Shady outside of Woodstock, then we rented on Lower Birdcliff in Woodstock, and then through the help of an art dealer I knew, James Cox, who recommended a realtor, and Philip Levine, the poet, who lives on the same road, Manorville Road, that I live in. We had performed there with the ensemble and stayed in that Colony Hotel in Woodstock, but we had stayed one night at Philip's overnight. And that's how I discovered the road and mentioned it to the realtor, and he had a place here. So we've been lucky to be here. A lot to Philip for that, and as well as other things.
Yeah, Philip's been on my show a few times, and he's a force of nature up here. I want you to read an example of a poem about this area. But first, let's talk about the book structure. It's in 5 sections.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, Poetic Justice is also divided into sections, and that was done, the publisher and editor of that, Susan Sherman, had taken all the poems and organized them, and that was a kind of a lesson to me. In the last book, they weren't organized that way. They were more straight through, but I liked that way, and it wasn't that, I was trying to get more how one poem relates to the other in terms of the feeling, and again, the tone. So that's how it was divided up, with each section being named after a particular poem that I thought stood out, right, and maybe exemplify the kind of sense that I was trying to get across.
It also changes, it affects the flow of the book. It's sort of like little islands, and you can read one section and then see how it reflects against the other.
Yeah, it sets up a kind of tension and a little bit of breathing between each part.
And when you write, I know it's every interviewer asks this, your process of writing, even the physical act of writing, has that changed for you over the years?
It did for a while when I'm back to writing on my computer, which I wasn't. I was actually writing a lot on my iPad, in the notes, which, there's a thing called Notes, which you can write, and then you can send it to yourself in an email, and it isolates the work just for that particular time. I got very excited about that for a couple of years and working that way. But I actually prefer to have a more structured way of working with the computer because it's just easier to deal with the poems after you write them. I don't even touch something that I've written for a year.
Well, I can understand that. I have poems that I haven't looked at in 5 years, and then all of a sudden I have more tools to tackle those poems.
Yeah, and it's nice to be surprised by something.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, I wrote that? Yeah, that's not that bad.
That's not that bad. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I like that. And I destroyed poems when I tackled them too soon. When I used to do it the other way, I had to teach myself the hands off.
Well, it's very easy through the revision process to kill whatever spark, caused the poem in the first place. It's a tricky business.
I don't think we know so much about what we're doing until after. Poetry is different than prose or writing nonfiction or history. It's a different. I find that I want to have less control. I want to be in control, but I want to allow my imagination and subconscious to also play a factor, and that could also even be in the editing. I usually read poems I like and feel that are close into a tape recorder to hear them. And hearing them and reading them on the page, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to order them. Just you want to be both cognizant of the page but also of the ear. Yep,
it needs to succeed both sound and page. I totally agree. Would you read The Woods Besides the House?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's interesting that you picked that out. We'll talk about it after. The Woods Beside the House. She saw a lot of strange birds this morning. One flew in circles around the hibiscus flower. One managed to swallow an early apple from the branch of the old orchard tree. One gathered worms before lifting into the sky like a helicopter. These strange, beautiful creatures tantalized her imagination, made her swing through the air like a cowboy's lasso, exchanged her vocabulary of rocks and snails and paper dolls for aeronautic words like wind thrust or avalanche, till she was turned inside out with confusion about wind and the islands of sanctuary in her rear view mirror, and the path through the tall cedar grove lined with stones awaiting the accidental slip of a shoe. The birds lifted her out of the ordinary, planted her on tinsel-covered earth, juggled her senses of propriety like the samba, till the forest was dancing with a fortitude everyone's mother would be proud of, and there on a branch, just out of sniffing reach of the mischievous cat, was a potpourri of birds creating a morning parade of colors and wondrous whistles sure to entice even the most lopsided, out-of-tune ear into a symphonic celebration of the woods beside the house.
Oh, that's lovely. That's Bruce Weber reading his poem, The Woods Beside the House, from his collection, There Are Too Many Words in My House. I just love the phrase with the cowboy's lasso. And it's very rhythmically lively, but it has a serenity about it also with the subject matter. I think it moves, but it has a more stately rhythm than some of your other poems, which have more momentum, I think.
Yeah, well, that was a kind of a breakthrough poem. It's interesting, because I know you wanted me to read that you picked that one. Because it really I was beginning to feel more comfortable maybe about writing about the things that are up here, being up here and having a house up here. I mean, it was written before we lived up here full time, but, I was doing a lot of writing in the summers when I was here. And that was written, of course, one summer when it was a lot of birds around.
I also like it, too, because it's an homage to Joanne, which I like.
Right.
And,
right. Yeah. Well, she, one of the reasons we wanted to find a place, I certainly wanted to find a place that she could have a garden.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, she's in the garden, creates a beautiful garden here every year. So.
Oh, lovely. This is Planet Poet, Words in Space at WIOX Community Radio. We're live and local from the Catskills, and I'm Sharon Israel, your host. Joining me by phone from the Hudson Valley is poet and art historian Bruce Weber. And Bruce, you are also an artist as well as being an art historian. And is creating a book very different from creating a series of paintings? I mean, of course it is. Essentially,
I don't do paintings, but I do collages. I don't think of even though I've had a couple of exhibitions of these collages a while ago, because I've kind of put them aside a bit, and I curated a number of shows. And I was in those shows. There were fellow poets, particularly in New York City. I curated a few shows with a group of people like Steve Zelashinsky and Jeffrey Wright, a group of us, Bob Heeman, poets who are also doing visual work. And so that's a little bit different. But I think of myself more as a poet working with images, as opposed to a visual artist. I don't think of myself as a visual artist. Maybe because as an art historian, I know how hard that is. And demanding to be really good at it, it's rare. It's really hard to be really good at it.
And your specialty is early American art. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've done things all over from the 18th century till now. But I've done a lot in the 19th century. And now I'm focusing really, for the most part, but not exclusively, on the Woodstock art colony, which began around 1902. And had a golden era that went on for decades.
A wonderful aspect of poetic justice and of your new book are the inclusion of reproductions of paintings by Arturo Rodriguez. And in this book, There Are Too Many Words in My House, you have the paintings in which you call your interiors section.
Right.
And is it your total connection to art, or your deep connection to art, is a reason why you put these, why you include these?
Actually, my first book, which was done with my second wife, Jane McLaughlin, we had Arturo's. I had a series of poems that I wrote for Arturo in that, and other books have had poems related to Arturo. I met Arturo in the early 1980s when I was doing an exhibition at the Norton Museum, then known as the Norton Gallery, called Walls. And there were three artists, Mike Lear, David Wojnarowicz, and Arturo Rodriguez, who were part of that exhibition. I think it opened in the fall of '85. And Arturo and I just hit it off. He's a wonderful painter, as is his wife, Demi. They're still in Miami. They're still very close friends. And Arturo's work just really impacted me as not only as an art historian or as a person, but also as a poet. I began to write poems after his. Originally, I think they were a series of watercolors that he did. And Arturo would give me would give me images, and I would respond. But I've been doing that for decades. And so that's how that, and also performing them with the ensemble.
Would you read one of your poems?
Sure. I'll read. Interiors is at the end of the book, and it's a multi-series poem. I think it's 9 parts. So I'm going to read you the last part. And Arturo's paintings, people should look. One, he's a great artist.
Beautiful stuff.
I'm going to actually give you, so it's HTTP ://www, but so Arturo Rodriguez art.com, and you can see these interiors, this series they did called Interiors, by going there. You can just look at his art in general.
Right, and that's Rodriguez with a Z at the end instead of an S.
Right.
Great.
So this is part 9. I sit in this chair and watch the world tumble to the ground. It's safe here among familiar things. The neighbor practicing balance in the yard, tiptoeing through the air in search of rapture and release. The walkers on the beach holding parasols above their head, dodging the traffic of the waves and the harsh memories of yesterday's storm. When the air cut through the town, lancing houses, schools, office towers, and I could barely breathe. In and out, till balance was restored, and I could rest on the balls of my feet, stepping forward like an old friend, capable of sharing laughter or a drink. In the hard rain of expectations, the doors open to the tide. The man drifts by on a floating roof. The walls shift their weight against the roar of a wave. But I sit here, gathering dreams in a restful world, prepared for any pratfall or sudden slipping into the shifting tide, removing uncertainty from its tug on my collar, safe in the warmth of a familiar chair and the certainty of 4 strong walls.
That's Bruce Weber reading from his book, There Are Too Many Words in My House, from his interior section. This poem was based on a painting by, I believe it's a painting by Arturo Rodriguez. And I'm so interested in the balance versus trying to balance versus solidity. You start the poem when you're sitting in a chair, and you end when you're sitting in a chair. But throughout, there are so many images of even the world tumbling to the ground. You're going to land on the balls of your feet. You're worried about pratfalls. And could you tell us a little bit more about that, or whatever you'd like to describe about the poem?
I mean, it's interesting when you look at it that way. I think that's one of the things I just absorbed, really, and changed me as a poet from Arturo's work. I've written poems for other painters. It's not the same thing. Like any artist, or most artists, one would say, one doesn't want to define necessarily what one is painting.
Sure.
And, we work with metaphors, and we work with images, and we work with things that are trying to convey an idea without being, precise, being clear. We want to leave it open. We want to leave it to the listener, to the reader.
There must have been something in the painting that...
Well, there are. I mean, what I would do is I'd set up an image on my computer every day, and I'd write a poem. I'd write a poem about each image. And I did that for many images. I don't know how many I did. I included 9 here. Mm-hmm. I probably wrote more, and I decided when I looked at them a year after I did them, which ones I thought were the strongest, or which ones could work best as a longer piece dealing with the subject. We also performed that with the ensemble. We had music, and we had props. So there was also that. So I think it's possible that even the network, the creating of the series of 9 were relating to a performance.
Mm-hmm. Would you read it again for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
I sit in this chair and watch the world tumble to the ground. It's safe here among familiar things. The neighbor practicing balance in the yard, tiptoeing through the air in search of rapture and release. The walkers on the beach holding parasols above their head, dodging the traffic of the waves and the harsh memories of yesterday's storm. When the air cut through the town, lancing houses, schools, office towers, and I could barely breathe. In and out, till balance was restored and I could rest on the balls of my feet, stepping forward like an old friend, capable of sharing laughter or a drink. In the hard rain of expectations, the doors open to the tide. The man drifts by on a floating roof. The walls shift their weight against the roar of a wave. But I sit here, gathering dreams in a restful world, prepared for any pratfall or sudden slipping into the shifting tide, removing uncertainty from its tug on my collar, safe in the warmth of a familiar chair and the certainty of 4 strong walls. I read this whole series on last Friday, and then it was performed as part of Perfect Pitch, the New Year's Day event, and it made me. And I kind of was looking for a series to read, which I felt was kind of in the spirit of what we've all been going through. And when I read that over twice, it makes me feel again so much like what we're going through now, and inside your house, and all these other things going on around.
I like your insight about that and the poem itself. You're listening to Planet Poet, Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and with me today by phone is poet and champion of poets, Bruce Weber.
When I was plucked from the womb by William Carlos Williams, a haiku wailed out of my mouth, and Dr. Williams patted my rump and whispered in my ear that he liked my poem because it was as tangible as the yowling of boys sticking their feet in an icy river. And when I learned to crawl, Dr. Williams came to my playroom and pretended to be a red wheelbarrow I caught around into imaginary corners. And together we'd investigate the dualities clinging to rocks or bricks or pickup sticks or dandelion seeds, or lift our index finger to write wet words upon frosted windows. Dr. Williams told me to open my eyes big to everything passing within the radius of my circumference, like an ant carrying a crumb on her back, like a day laborer pungent with the odor of a rickety old building, like a woman seated motionless on a bed in a painting by Edward Hopper. Dr. Williams was my childhood companion on travels to abstract places, outdistancing narratives tumbling down the stairs. And we'd hold a telescope to our eye to witness atoms dancing in their shells or waves cresting on a seashore. Dr. Williams helped me understand the life force inside things accidentally spilling or propped up so they stand tall, or dark as an eclipse of the sun and moon, making us scratch our heads for the answers to all things intangible. Yes, Dr. Williams delivered me to the world, bloody, crying, grasping to understand the properties of steam, the porousness of clouds, the elemental structure of the air floating between us.
That was Bruce Weber and the No Chance Ensemble in the performance of I Was Delivered by William Carlos Williams. I figured we'd start the second half of the show with one of the ensemble's pieces.
Nice to hear that.
Yeah, it's great. Of course, William Carlos Williams, a lot of people don't know he was an obstetrician. And actually, one of my friends was delivered by him. So these are, the No Chance Ensemble are put your poems to music. Is that
mostly with Joanne Pagano-Weber, her work, and Bob Hart, who unfortunately, very unfortunately, is not with us anymore, and Nelson Alexander, our guitarist. That was our basic group. When we started out, we actually had a choreographer, and we had a dancer. At one point, I think we had two dancers. It was a little bit larger. This would have been around, I don't know, 96, something like that.
Is that when you started the ensemble?
Yeah, I think it must have been the fall of 95 or something, early 96. And we were around for a long time. We performed everywhere. It was great. It was great. Things changed. You know, people got other responsibilities. I'm so glad we put the CD together, which we worked on for 6 months. It was not like just overnight going in the studio. We worked on it. We met, every weekend, Nelson and Joanne and I, to get it, to record it well. And now it's, we have it as a kind of legacy of what we were doing for years.
I want to thank Nelson for getting me the MP3s.
Yes.
So we can hear them on this show.
I know. I know.
it's such the guitar part is sort of very whimsical, and the words are very wistful of this. How is that song received when you play it? When you played it?
Oh, it was really one of our classic things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of my best poems.
It's a great poem.
Particularly, and we would perform we'd start in the summer to rehearse. For a number of years, everything we did was memorized, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
We'd start out with doing a reading, and we'd do maybe 3 pieces, and then we'd get invited, and we'd do 6 pieces until we'd have them all done, and they would all be performed, and then we'd perform a few times the entire thing, which could be as long as 30 to 40 minutes. It started out usually including my work only, and then we started to include Joanne and Bob's and then it was all of us having work that was included. So that's a CD fest.
Yeah, it's so different. I'm a singer, and it's a totally different thing when you perform something memorized. It's very liberating if you can do it.
Yeah. No, it was always an adventure.
Yeah, it is. It's
we got invited in the year 2000, January 1st, 2000. We performed at La Mama as part of a big production.
Wow.
And so we were just part of it, but it was quite an exciting night. Everybody thought, Y2. Remember when they thought all the computers were going to crash and everything like that. Right. I remember. I think we did a few nights at La Mama. One time we sort of repeated what we did twice. We lost track of what we were doing. I don't know if anybody noticed, or people don't notice. They don't know. But they don't know necessarily what's happening. So.
It's funny. There's an ensemble called the Da Capo Ensemble and they used to play all their pieces twice. They're in good company. So the history of the groups started in 1995 with Joanne and Nelson and Bob Hart. And I don't know if we're I have 3 of the pieces. I don't know if they're in chronological order, but
it's hard. Pretty close in time.
Okay.
Late 90s, I guess, mid to late 90s. And actually, the Williams piece, Willie Hartland, who's a very, very good animator. Willie's was also his father was delivered by William Carlos Williams. And sometimes I will write a piece that Joanne sort of triggers by saying something, and so she said, Willie's father. And that's why I wrote that piece. But, of course, delivery can be delivered in many ways, both as a baby but also delivered as a poet. Because
sure.
Williams had a big impact on me.
Yeah, I like the wheel. You mentioned the wheelbarrow, and it's a really good poem. Okay, I'm going to play another piece called My New Novel. Here we go.
Listen carefully for my screams.
On page 1, coo in my ear.
On page 10, open up a vein.
On page 40, be vulnerable.
On page 100, worship Hiawatha.
On page 152, betray someone you're especially close to.
On page 185, unlock that trunk and say hello to your sister.
On page 197, stare down that rabid dog.
On page 201, unleash the phantoms from the elevator shaft.
On page 223, let's visit the tunnel of love.
On page 237, stick your tongue down past my tonsils.
On page 288, put me in a cell with a faith healer.
On page 311, I'll wrench that fire hydrant with your bare hands.
On page 327, snap some pictures of my naked butt.
On page 363, let's take the subway to Harlem.
On page 416, let's visit Langston Hughes' old building.
On page 450, reread everything by Emile Zola.
On page 460, memorize the complete works of Basho.
On page 480, become best friends with Percy Bysshe Shelley.
On page 490, drop me in this coffin.
On page 500, listen carefully for my screams.
That's great. That's a Bruce Weber and the No Chance Ensemble in my new novel. I laughed a lot, I have to tell you.
It was a lot of fun to do. We loved performing that. It was one of our signature pieces.
Oh, it's really great. It's like a list poem, almost.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I wrote it, as a poem, not knowing it would ever be performed that way. Just all the possibilities that one could add in writing a novel, all the things with the directions and things that one could go with, page one this and page this, and so all those things sort of allowed me to have the freedom to be imaginative.
I thought the complete works of Basho was very funny.
Yeah,
I like that. So that's Joe, the voice of Joanne Pagano Weber,
right.
And you, and who is the third person?
Bob Hart.
And Bob Hart.
The poet Bob Hart. Whenever we say Bob Hart, it always has to be the poet Bob Hart.
Yeah, it's really a lively piece. Have you recorded anything under your new incarnation of the New Chance Ensemble?
Well, no, I mean, the new ensemble, I think we used a few times because we have worked with Rick Pantel and Karen Whitman, who are fabulous musicians and also visual artists who live in Bearsville, very close friends of ours, and we have a kind of one of these magical rapport with them. And we did a number of readings at the Harmony in Woodstock, which is no longer a poetry venue, and actually it's been transformed into something else. I don't know if it's quite open yet. And so, we just work with them. I grab a series of poems, and Rick and Karen are amazing, can just come up with the music, and we record it, and then we study it, and then we rehearse before the event with the music. So I've used that name, the New Ensemble, New Chance Ensemble with Rick and Karen. We haven't done anything in a little bit of time, but we did a number of things together. And I recorded it, but more like on my phone. So there are records of what we did.
Well, after COVID, I'll let me know where you're going to be playing, and I'll let everybody know.
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know, four of us, they're even more cautious than we're extraordinarily cautious about COVID. But they are even more. Everybody's got their own level of concern. So. Well,
this is sort of like running the last mile of a marathon. It's very tough.
The last mile.
It really is. So I want to play one more.
Okay.
Called Under the Surface.
Under the surface,
my skin boils like the mouth of a ripe volcano.
Under the surface,
my dreams get caught in the burning toaster.
Under the surface, I'm shaken like a washing machine kicked too many times at the laundromat. Under the surface,
I'm hopeless.
I'm helpless.
I'm hemorrhaging.
Under the surface,
I can't eat, can't sleep, can't defend myself from fistfights raging in my subconscious, can't jar you loose from that vision of me planted on that car hood.
Under the surface, my blisters open and moles stick out their tongue.
Under the surface,
Everything is still. Everything is motionless. Everything is waiting.
Under the surface, reality is cooking me some pure heroin.
Under the surface, my dog Sally resents me.
Under the surface, the train leaves me crying at the station.
Under the surface,
I'm an alien. I'm soft and breakable. I embarrass easily. I jump in my open grave. I died long ago.
Under the surface, I'm mature as a hand-rolled leaf of Cuban tobacco, relaxed as a recently pressed pair of trousers, calm as an undertaker.
That's Bruce Weber and the No Chance Ensemble. Oh, great lines in that. I kicked too many times in the laundromat. I love. So that was Joanna Pagano again.
Yeah, Joanne. Yeah, Bob Hart, Nelson Alexander on guitar.
So that is the. So glad we got to listen to the No Chance Ensemble, and you've Joanne. I'm sorry, Joanne.
No, it's Joanne. Yeah,
Joanne. Did the cover for the book. It's really quite an intriguing cover.
Yes, it is, and it seemed perfect for this book. Some of the poems in the book that really kind of were in the same spirit. It's funny. I mean, we've collaborated a lot in performance, and we actually a couple of summers ago, for 6 or 7 straight days, wrote together in the morning. We haven't written that much together, although the ensemble did write together. And for a few years, we did there was the Curious Adventures of Belinda and Mark, which we did part 1, part 2, and part 3, and that was kind of a novel, a visual novel, but also one that we performed. And in those cases, I left sort of gaps in the writing for Bob and Joanne to enter and participate in the writing of the novel. So we've done that.
And the cover has soldiers sort of falling, like tumbling towards the earth,
Right.
in clouds, and it's very disorienting, but beautiful looking.
Right. Yeah.
And you've written a couple of war-related poems in the book. Did that coincide
Right.
with?
More. Well, I don't know if the timing was exact for her doing those paintings. I mean, I have sometimes written some poems relating to paintings of hers, or I'll allude to them in poems.
Mm-hmm.
But this wasn't written. The poems of the book weren't written that way. They may have been in a similar spirit, but they weren't written. And we were trying to figure out what was the right painting for the cover. This just stood out.
Would you read one of these poems that
Sure.
echo the cover, so to speak?
Yeah. I'll read Between the Wars.
Great.
Sort of again feels like where we are right now in certain ways. Mm-hmm. Between the Wars. You remind me of the years between the wars, when love surrendered easily and time fluttered its wings like a bat out of hell. It was then that you came to me, carrying on about the weight of his refusals, about the glimmer in his eye, about the terrain of his tempestuousness, leaning on the table with a heavy fist and dreams broken like eggs on the hot plate of the sidewalk, staring into some blank abyss where the clock's hands turn unmercifully in endless circles, and women curtsy and men pin carnations on their lapel. And the sun sets in the morning, and nighttime is alive with colored shadows that recline in the tubes of the painters. And Geneva purrs on with business, and a glass raised to neutrality, and the skeleton bones of the helpless dead slip under the white sheets of the morgue, and the windows open, and the bodies jump, and the streets are scarred with the war dead. And you stretch your hand out, shaking off kindness like a leaf, slinging apologies like soft bullets, reminding us of time's follies and the wicked playthings with their jagged elbows. Love breaking mirrors, love climbing to the roof, love storming the barricades, love sleeping in the park, love joining the folds of life together, like busy ants running into the pyre of the day.
I like the anaphora at the end with love, the repetition of love. But that image of the shadows recline in the tubes of the painter, that's wonderful. That's really great. You know, we're running out of time. I can't believe it. We could do another hour at least. But I wanted to ask you, we've talked about Perfect Pitch. I was so sorry. I listened. It was 6 hours on New Year's Day, so I can only get parts of it. And I'm upset that I missed your reading, but at least we got to hear it today. So you did this as alternative programming for something that was going on at St. Mark's in the 90s?
Right, 95 to 2017. Was that it? 17? Yeah, 17. 17, yeah, no, 18. That 25 years, I organized an event on New Year's Day in the city. It began on the pyramid, above the Pyramid Club, Cafe Nico. It was at CBGB's. It was 10 years at the Bowery Poetry Club. Knitting Factory as well. And then I wanted to really move it up here. We moved up here, and there's just so many terrific writers. And I kind of felt like, you know, what I had established in the city, and I hoped it would stand on its own and continue. It did last year. This year, there was a New Year's Day event, but it wasn't part of the alternative New Year's Day event, which I organized. Some of the same people were in it, but it was different.
But it was still wonderful because it existed, and it was very interesting.
Right, and so this year, you know, we debated, should we do it on Zoom, and I find Zoom a little bit difficult, a little cool, especially when somebody reads something or performs something, and then people sort of don't know what to do, and you don't get that feedback, of course, that you get in the room. So luckily, because of David Schell, who's a great supporter of the arts in Kingston, has this wonderful space at 229 Greenkill, and has been a real friend and an enormous supporter of things that I've done. I've done a number of events there, curated an exhibition there too, and been in at least one show there. David, collaborator, and we came up with the idea of filming it in advance. So, people had somewhere between 6 and 9 minutes to perform. Normally the event is 3 minutes. Hopefully we're going to be back on January 1st, 2022.
That would be great.
And by the way, if people want to hear it, it's easy to listen to.
You could do Perfect Pitch to Poetry Extravaganza on YouTube. I think it would work.
Okay, that's good.
And,
that's good.
Yeah, we could find it.
And it's there. All 6 hours are there, and you can move around. You don't have to watch it in any sequence. I'm first. Because we were originally going to have hosts live for 10 minutes, then we decided to film the hosts as well. So I was the first host announcing the event, so I read first.
Burroughs, before we go, I would like you to read another poem. We talked a little bit when we spoke before the show about you writing during COVID, and sort of you mentioned traveling in your mind. It's a good way to travel. But I was wondering if you could read Another Beautiful Day in the Pandemic to go out with.
Right, sure. Another Beautiful Day in the Pandemic. It was so beautiful up here this summer, I thought, or irony. Another beautiful day in the pandemic. The bumblebees are fat with honey. The hummingbirds hover like helicopters in the sun. The chipmunks skirt across the grass like racing cars. The cat watches the shadows play in the field of the Lord. Another beautiful day in the pandemic. Cross my heart and hope to live. Grieve with me in the dark folds where memory plays out of tune tricks with Father Time. Where losers grin and winners spend all their money they own. And dancing girls twirl in the hot complacency of the sun. Another beautiful day in the pandemic. The garden is dense with the perspiration of morning. Pinks whistle, reds purr, blues rustle, white shimmers like stars. I'll take you in my arms in do-si-do where the truth rushes in like a fool and trees stand tall against criminals, snatching alibis from the branches of despair. Another beautiful day in the pandemic. Let's meet at the gates of Eden, where fate is split like a rail and love is thrown into the wind like apple seeds, where clocks rust to oblivion and the morning rises into the clouds like a silent prayer for those who are lost. Another beautiful day in the pandemic.
Bruce, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And
it was a real joy.